We're going to record just a quick little update, Israel under siege, to talk about what's going on in Israel right now, Israel and Jerusalem. First, I'm going to set up a little bit of a context so you can understand sort of the basis for what's going on. First thing I want to do is I want to look at, there's a lot of world reaction to what's going on. And this is from a Swiss newspaper, Le Temps, this morning, talking about Israel-Palestine. Look at the editorial cartoon here. The caption is, I believe it is a landlord dispute in Jerusalem that has gone wrong. Let me just read a little bit from that article, the translation. So this French to English translation, so it may not be exactly correct. The tensions that have engulfed Jerusalem have spread like wildfire, leading to an escalation of violence between Israel and the Palestinian territories. Rocket fire and airstrikes follow one another in a deadly gear, fueled by extremists on both sides, in which makes one fear the worst. And I think what this article has to say, sort of editorializing a little bit, is that this is a very serious situation. This is not anything to be dismissed. It is a very volatile situation. It appears to be on an order of magnitude in some respects, particularly the attacks coming from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza and firing rockets into Israel. Talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The article continues, the current political flutter in Israel and the Palestinian territories is benefiting extremists on both sides. On the evening of Monday, May 10th, the violence that has shaken Israel and the Palestinian territories for the past month has increased in intensity. For the first time since the Gaza war in 2014, sirens calling on Jerusalem residents to go to shelters rang out, raising fears of another major conflict. But the symbol is strong for Hamas. Deprived of Palestinian elections canceled by a declining Mahmoud Abbas and fearful for his political future, he can boast of having run Israeli MPs to shelters in the basements of the Knesset and interrupted ongoing negotiations to form a government with the support of the Arab Ram Party. For the past month, tensions have been building in Jerusalem, notably in Sheikh Jarrah, an Arab neighborhood in East Jerusalem, where daily protests in support of Palestinian families threatened with deportation have already led to dozens of arrests. So let me explain what it says. So the caption here says, I believe it's a landlord dispute in Jerusalem that has gone wrong. It is a situation that arose starting a couple weeks ago. Actually, it's been pending for a long time. There are calls now for the UN to get involved. I found this graphic, which I thought was pretty apropos to really what the UN usually does. A lot of it centers around the Temple Mount. Now, I mentioned this last Sunday in my update. You can go get that at the Fellowship Bible Chapel YouTube channel or on Rumble, Real FBC, if you want to see more of that or see it in a little bit more detail. But this is a picture that I used last Sunday showing that there was a box of rocks that was set up on the Temple Mount. Now, this is the month of Ramadan. It's a holy month on the Islamic calendar. People were gathering on the Temple Mount. But look at some of these other pictures. Now, ask yourself, are these people who are just going there to worship, or is there a bigger agenda? Look at this guy wheeling a wheelbarrow near the Dome of the Rock. Look at some of these things. This is inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque and immediately outside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You see the barricades that have been set up. You see the rocks. You see them actually walking around inside the mosque with their shoes on, which is, I think, verboten. But it's clear that there's a political agenda here. There's a much bigger agenda because they want to make a point and they want to do it during their holy month. Here's some more pictures of the rocks set up. So you can see some of the steps around the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You see the Dome of the Rock in the background in both pictures. You see the barricades set up. Some of them have taken off their shoes as they're in there, but they have rocks set up because they're going to be attacking. They believe that the police are coming. They've set it up into a situation. They've amped up the emotions of everybody. And the rocks are being used both against the Israeli police the Temple Mount police that will come to squelch the situation. And they will also be used to throw rocks down on the worshipers at the Western Wall in the Kotel. Ask yourself this. Are the people this was the ship that was seized by the United States Fifth Fleet last Sunday in the Arabian Sea, loaded with Russian and Chinese-made arms, rockets, launchers, ammunition, that sort of thing, on its way to the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Now, it's assumed that they were going to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, but it's also possible that they would then be smuggled into Gaza to be used in Gaza. That's also a distinct possibility. So the people that did that certainly would do this. Now, let me set up a little bit of a context for what's been going on in Jerusalem recently. Now, we remember the Trump plan. The Trump plan was going to divide Israel into a Palestinian and an Israeli state. That was the plan. If the Palestinians accepted it, they would have their own state. Now, it's unlikely that the Palestinians were going to accept this, but nevertheless, this is the proposal of the Trump plan. Part of that was to divide the area of Jerusalem. I'll show you a little bit of a map about how they wanted to divide up the environment around Jerusalem, the geographic region around Jerusalem. That also led to Trump last August 13th. They signed the Abraham Accords on the White House lawn. Here's a little bit more detail about how if things had been accepted by the Palestinians, and I use the term Palestinians, they're Arabs. I don't consider them a people distinct from other Arabs, but nevertheless, so everybody uses the term Palestinians. So I'm going to use the term Palestinians, even though I don't really accept it as a valid term. It's just something that's come into common usage. So the Trump plan would have divided the area around Jerusalem. You see the three circles. The lower one is Abu Dis. Those were proposed Muslim areas for a capital of a Palestinian state. Currently, the administrative capital of the Palestinian in the area known as the West Bank, the biblical Judea and Samaria, is in Ramallah. But it was said that they would get these neighborhoods in Jerusalem. The blue areas are Israeli settlements in that area. You see the old city. Let me get my little laser pointer out here. So you see the old city right here. And starting a couple weeks ago, it hasn't been a couple weeks ago, but it heated up a couple weeks ago in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, which is right here, just north of the old city. The Damascus Gate would be here. The Herod Gate would be here. The Lions Gate would be here. This is the Muslim quarter of the old city. And the Temple Mount is right in this area. The Jewish quarter, of course, is here. So there were protests that took place because of a dispute. Here's another sort of a picture. So again, just to get you sort of oriented geographically, here is, this is Mamilla Mall. You have the Jaffa Street. This is Jerusalem City Hall Plaza, the municipal buildings. This is a street called Elisha Street. That's a street we stayed on when we were there 4 years ago during this exact same time of year. You have the New Gate. You have the Jaffa Gate, but then the gates along the north wall of the old city, there are the New Gate, the Damascus Gate, and Herod's Gate. And then this Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood is right up in this area to the north. To give you a little orientation, the Garden Tomb area, that if you've been there, this is the Garden Tomb area. Sheikh Jarrah is here. A lot of people stay in these hotels here. There's a Dan Hotel, I believe. There's the Grand Court Hotel, and I can't remember the name of the other one. There's 3 big hotels right here. And then the American Colony and the hotel associated with the American Colony is here. So this is the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Now, back in 1900, this is what the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood looked like. It was largely unbuilt. There was a mosque there. There were a few buildings, but by and large, the thing was sort of just barely inhabited. In 1914, these are Turkish troops from the Ottoman Empire marching through the Sheikh Jarrah area. Here's another map to kind of give you a little bit of a little more detail. Again, here is the Temple Mount within the old city. Here's the Muslim quarter, and then here is Sheikh Jarrah. So the hotels that I told you about are right here. The American Colony Hotel is in this area. And then up here is Mount Scopus. That's where Hebrew University is, and the Mormons have some buildings up there as well. Great view if you want to see a shot from a high elevation of Jerusalem. Along the wall here, this would be the eastern wall. There's an eastern gate here. That's where they've had a dispute about the mosque that the additional mosque that the Palestinians have tried to take over the last few years. Of course, this Temple Mount area is under the control of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. They've appointed a Muslim imam known as the organization called the Waqf. And so the most important Muslim guy controls the Temple Mount area. He has the keys and that sort of thing. This is the Kidron Valley, and then over here is this is the Mount of Olives. And then, of course, here is the Abu Dis that we had talked about, one of the Palestinian neighborhoods. So there is a large contingent of Palestinians that live in the environs of the old city of Jerusalem. For example, here you see the city of David. That's where a lot of excavations are going on. The blue squares represent settler houses that have been built in these areas. There's also a Arab village called Silwan that's here, an Arab area. Some people think that this is where the Temple Mount was originally. I don't agree with that view. I think the temple was in the area of the Temple Mount. You can see the Dome of the Rock right here, and then the Al-Aqsa Mosque is here. The western wall, sometimes called the Wailing Wall or the Kotel, is located right here. And then this is the Jewish quarter. Just remember sort of the geography. This is the western wall of the Temple Mount. And then to the west of the Temple Mount is the Jewish quarter. Largely to the north of the Temple Mount is the Muslim quarter. And then here is the Damascus Gate. Here is Sheikh Jarrah. And again, the Garden Tomb would be in this area here. So what happened was that a number of years ago, Jewish settlers bought property. And you see that represented here by the blue and red buildings and pink buildings. Those were that property, and there's pretty clear title transfer to that property to Jewish, they'll call them Jewish settlers. I might also add that there are also, so here in Sheikh Jarrah, there are a number, as I said, there are Jewish settlers, Orthodox Jews mainly, that have been moving in and buying property over the last decades. They clearly own the property, and you can see that, 120 years ago or 100 years ago, this was a largely sparsely populated area of Jerusalem. But of course, as Jerusalem has grown and expanded, it has grown. So what the Jewish settlers did was they built homes in this area and they leased them to Palestinian Arabs. Starting about, I'm going to guess, maybe 20 years ago, disputes arose because the Palestinian Arabs refused to pay rent. That has led to litigation, And on May 6th, the Israeli court issued an eviction notice that because they had not paid rent, the Arabs were going to have to move out. That led to a lot of protests outside of the Damascus gates, a lot of confrontations over the last week and a half to 2 weeks. Jewish settlers approached that area. If this area is, I would say it's largely Arab populated, Sheikh Jarrah, but right here on the other side of Highway 60, these areas here in Jerusalem are largely I would call them ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. They're Orthodox to ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. For example, if you go along this road in the evening, you will just be shocked at the number of the Orthodox Jews are out shopping. Families, everybody has, it seemed like 6, 8, 10 children. It's kind of an amazing sight to see. Every couple you see as we went around Jerusalem, even on Jaffa Street and other places in the evening, every Jewish couple had a baby. Without exception, every Jewish couple had a baby. When we were driving into Jerusalem, I remember the thing that kind of struck me was as we drove through one of the Orthodox neighborhoods to get to the apartment where we were staying, was that every lady on the street had a baby carriage and 2 or 3 or 4 young children with her. And I would estimate in maybe a kilometer, which is about 0.6 of a mile, drive down one of the main streets, we saw easily over 100 baby carriages. So the population is growing. That creates a lot of tension because they need places to live. So the story from the Arab side is that they're trying to drive us out because they want to take over our property. But it's property that Jewish people own. They've built homes, they've rented them to the Arabs, but the Arabs have not been paying rent. So that led to protests outside the Damascus gate. And sometimes there was confrontations. There's even a young child that was injured in one of the confrontations between mainly Orthodox Jews and the Palestinians. Both sides were, Palestinians shouting death to Jews. The Orthodox Jews in some cases were shouting death to Arabs. At least this is what has been reported. So when the eviction order came in, everything kind of really ramped up. Now, it's clear from looking at, as I mentioned last Sunday, last weekend, as this was approaching, the Iranians came out with some, we're coming after you, we'll destroy you we'll destroy Israel in one operation. Then the Ayatollah had some comments to make about how Zionism was the Zionists were a cancerous tumor that needed to be removed, and that we were going to get rid of the Jewish state of Israel. Hezbollah came out and said, we're preparing an operation, and we know that you're having a big drill here in the north of Israel. So you must be a weak army because you're having to practice. If you were a good army, you wouldn't really need to practice. It was clear propaganda, but it was all very well coordinated. So, in the context of all this, the other thing that was kind of happening at the time was there's supposed to be, I think right after Ramadan, there were supposed to be Palestinian elections. As the polling took place, it was pretty clear that Mahmoud Abbas, who has been the head of the Palestinian Authority since 2005 or 2006, in 2005 or 2006, he was elected to a 4-year term. So he's now in the 15th year or 16th year of his 4-year term. He's canceled all the elections since. It was pretty clear from conversations I had when we were there 4 years ago, and then the polling that was indicating that if an election took place, it was likely that Hamas was going to win the control of the legislature, the parliament there for the Palestinians, and someone from Hamas would become the new head of the Palestinian Authority. Abbas didn't like this. I don't think Israel liked it. So Abbas sort of created this, I would call it a sham reason to not have elections. He said, well, all these people in East Jerusalem, which is really sort of a made-up term, all these people in East Jerusalem that shouldn't vote in the election, they need to vote. And if they don't get to vote in the election, then I'm canceling the election. So that his insistence on that was the excuse that he was going to get. That led to protest. As things ramped up, there was a bus that was stopped a little a ways north in Israel, near an Israeli base. They had Palestinians on the bus. They were on their way to the Temple Mount for Ramadan prayers and on Friday prayers. As they approached the base, usually the buses are waved through, but this time I'm pretty sure they had a good inkling. Intelligence that told them that there were terrorists on the bus. They stopped the bus. There was a shootout. An Israeli female soldier shot and killed 2 of them, and another one was wounded. I believe he's still in critical condition. Abbas, so this created even more tensions. That led to attacks, which happens in these cases. The Palestinians usually throw rocks, and they say, well, just throwing rocks. But for example, here is a confrontation that occurred just near the Jewish quarter outside the old city. You see the car here drive up, and immediately the Palestinians, you see them coming up, they're attacking him with rocks and that sort of thing. And he backs up, and then you'll see that he comes, sort of careening through. He hits someone. He goes up on the barricades. And of course, this is being used, the last part of the clip. They never play the first part of the clip, but in the Palestinian media, they've only focused on the last part of the clip. You see them, they're throwing rocks and that sort of thing. There's a guy comes in, throws a rock right at sort of dead aim. So this guy was attacked. And so he was being attacked. He backed up. Here comes the police. Now he finally gets out. And this is one of the rocks that hit him. So everybody says, well, it's just a rock. I don't understand what your problem is. So this is the problem. These things are deadly. People get killed from these rocks all the time. It's like throwing them off of an overpass on a freeway. So this is sort of the this is sort of what's heightened the tension everywhere. We are also having this convergence of events that was taking place in Jerusalem on Monday. On Monday, there was, of course, there was the continued stalemate in the government. Netanyahu had to return his mandate because he could not form a coalition of 61 members of the Knesset. He needed 61 out of the 120 to become prime minister. So he returned the mandate last weekend to President Rivlin. President Rivlin then gave the mandate for a 4-week mandate to form a government to Yair Lapid, who is I would call him a left-wing politician. A lot of people think he's a bit of a lightweight. He was a TV presenter. I don't think he even graduated from high school. And so he has been trying to form a government of a coalition of 61. Naftali Bennett, who used to be part of Likud, has a party called Yamina. I believe he got 7 seats, 7 Knesset members in the last election. He has been negotiating with Lapid. They have said that if Lapid's group, Lapid is able to form a government, Naftali Bennett would be the prime minister. He had been the defense minister under one of the some of the years that Netanyahu's been in office. I think Netanyahu's been in office now for 12 years on this latest round. So that was going on. But one of the things that to form the coalition that they needed was they needed some of the Arab parties. The Arab parties have a thing called the Joint List, but the Ram party, under a guy also named Abbas, had said that they were willing to join the coalition with Netanyahu, but they couldn't join the coalition with Netanyahu because some of the parties joining the coalition with Netanyahu were the right-wing and ultra-Orthodox parties and the Zionist parties, and they didn't want anything to do with the Arabs. So Lapid and Bennett were negotiating with the Ram party to join in. But as things ramped up and these tensions increased at the Temple Mount, it appears that the Ram party under Abbas, not Mahmoud Abbas, but this other Abbas, has backed off. So this is all happening over this last weekend. And then Monday, 2 days ago, was a convergence of a couple things that I don't believe that it's ever happened. The first was the last day of Ramadan. This is the day that the Muslims believe that Muhammad received the Quran from Allah. So it's a very important day on their calendar. They've had the month of Ramadan. They fast every day until sunset. Shared an article with you last Sunday that Jonathan Spire had wrote in the Weekend Australian, talking about his observation living in Jerusalem was that things were getting very tense, that his interaction with some of the Arabs in Jerusalem just wasn't going the same way, that something was afoot, and all of these other things were playing into it. The other event that was taking place on Monday was Independence. It was Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day. It's a very big celebration in Israel. It is the day that they celebrate the reunification of Jerusalem from the Six-Day War. Now, that happened in June of 1967, but because of the way the Israeli Jewish calendar works, and even the Muslim calendar works, they're all on kind of different. We have our calendar, they have their calendar, Muslims have their calendar. So even though the reunification of Jerusalem took place, as this New York Times article shows, around June 7th or 8th of 1967, the anniversary generally runs sometime in May. So when we were there in the last couple of weeks of May in 2017, we were there for Jerusalem Day, Yom Yerushalayim. And it's a great day. The people are marching down the street. They're carrying flags. They bring all the students from the yeshivas and schools. And they march down Jaffa Street, and they march down through the Jaffa Gate down to the Western Wall, and they celebrate there. And they have a parade of flags. It's a very wonderful time to be in Jerusalem. If you support the Jewish state of Israel, it's quite moving. When we were there in 2017, they said that there were more people in Jerusalem that day than had been in Jerusalem on any single day in its history. And I would believe it. It was a celebratory madhouse. It was a great time to be there. The energy was, you could feel it everywhere you walked. But it was to celebrate the reunification of the city of Jerusalem. And here's a picture on the right where you see this is what the Western Wall looked like right after the Six-Day War in 1967. It had been a trash heap. The Jews had not really been allowed to go there from 1948 to 1967. They used to dump their trash there. So that had to be cleaned up. So what you see now in the Western Wall Plaza there in Jerusalem is a sort of relatively recent creation, certainly within the lifetime of everyone who's listening to this. So we have this convergence. We have the end of Ramadan, we have the political situation going on, and we have Independence Day being celebrated, and all hitting at the same time. This creates a volatile mix, and I'm not so sure, what I would call a toxic stew. Now, one of the things that happened during the celebration, and I want to maybe just unpack this a little bit for you. So you see, this is the celebration that's taking place at the Western Wall. And this video is being played all over Arab media. Because here, what they're saying is, oh, look at the Jews. They're celebrating the burning of Al-Aqsa Mosque. And unfortunately, so this you will see this video replayed over and over again from now until the Lord returns. This will always be played. And again, it was the convergence of Independence Day, Jerusalem Day, with the end of Ramadan. So the Temple Mount is full of people. Remember, they have all the rocks stored up that I showed you in those pictures. They're essentially riding on the Temple Mount. They're trying to stoke tensions. The leadership, the Iranians and the Turks are, stoking up people to create these riots, to create this volatile situation so they can use it for propaganda. And here they have sort of the ultimate propaganda video. They have Jews celebrating at the Western Wall the reunification of Jerusalem while there is a fire going on in the Temple Mount. Now, listen, I saw a lot of what I would call Christian pro-Israel websites that unfortunately released this, and they said, oh, look, Al-Aqsa Mosque is burning. It's about ready to be destroyed. This was simply not true, and I'm a little bit concerned that some people have a tendency to rush forward with their sort of extreme interpretation of events and not vet things, and the goal seems to be first with a video and a extreme conclusion rather than sending out the video, which I have no problem with, but looking at exactly what happened, because the Al-Aqsa Mosque was not on fire. So before this fire started, here is what the video looked like. This is the celebration that's taking place. And you see up there, you see the flashes going on in the Temple Mount. Those are fireworks and that type of thing that are being thrown by Palestinians or shot by Palestinians towards the thing. And then now you see here, you can see that there's this fire that starts. This is the dome of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is the southern part of the Temple Mount. This is Al-Aqsa Mosque here. You see the Dome of the Rock over here. And so there's a plaza with trees in it here and steps and columns and arches and that sort of thing. So the concern of the Israeli soldiers, the temple police, was that the rocks and everything were going to be thrown down onto the celebrators here in the Western Wall Plaza. So, but you also saw at the beginning of this video, let me play this again. So you see at the beginning, you see the flashes going on, you see things being up here, and then you start to see the smoke start. This is not the Al-Aqsa Mosque. See the smoke starting here. This is not the Al-Aqsa Mosque on fire. People who said that did not take the time to unpack. So I'm going to try to do that based on my knowledge of the Temple Mount, my study of the Temple Mount, and what's going on. Here is another video from a slightly different angle to the right. So now this is the Western Wall that you see. Temple Mount beyond, and then beyond there in the distance, if it was daylight, you could see the Mount of Olives. But understand also that's a very high wall, so a lot of people in the plaza, they're not even going to see the flames and everything that are starting on the Temple Mount. So here is here's another angle of the video, and you can actually see the things being shot from Al-Aqsa Mosque, from the roof of Al-Aqsa Mosque, towards Israeli soldiers. And so what happens, so either a tear gas canister or one of these, I think personally came from the Palestinians, or it was intentionally set. This area of trees caught on fire. Here is you see the video here that shows that tree on fire. That tree is not next to Al-Aqsa Mosque. The person pans to the right. Let me play that again. So you will see the person, he'll pan to the right towards the Western Wall, and then he will pan all the way around to the north to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and then come back. So he's looking towards the south now, and you see a tree on fire. Here's a picture of it. That tree is not located in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So as best as I can tell, this is an aerial view of the Temple Mount taken by a drone. Here is the Western Wall, the Kotel, the plaza, the Western Wall Plaza. This is the Jewish quarter of the Old City. So some of those videos that you saw were shot from the overlook here. It's a pretty steep climb to get from the plaza up to the level of the Old City. This is where the golden menorah that they plan to use in the next temple is located. The Temple Institute is up in that area. So here's Al-Aqsa Mosque. Here's the Dome of the Rock. And I'm pretty sure that it was one of these, probably this tree right here that was on fire. You can see that's probably 20 or 30 yards away from the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the Al-Aqsa Mosque was not burning. The propagation of this through the Palestinian media is, in my view, akin to a blood libel against Jews. This is being used to stoke passions. And if you look at Twitter, where this video is seen, you will see many Muslims and Arabs just absolutely livid that the Jewish police or the settlers or the extremists were trying to burn down their mosque and take over this mosque. No, they were having a celebration in the plaza. I could show you videos from prior years where it would look almost exactly the same as it did this year. The only thing that difference was this year was they were stoking a riot on the Temple Mount, and you saw things being launched from the roof of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It was a very old building built back about late 600 AD. This building was built mid-600. The Dome of the Rock was built somewhere in about 650, 655 AD, and built on its octagon shape. So it was built on the foundations of a Byzantine church of the same shape. So this is as you know, this is a very volatile area. This is probably one of the most contested areas on earth. But the trees that were on fire were not next to the Al-Aqsa. They were close to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, but they are away. Again, I believe, based on my research, is that whoever was taking that video was positioned here, and he panned to the right you could see these arches, and then he turned around, he got a little bit of a shot of the Dome of the Rock, and then he went back around and focused on the trees. So, and that's been the conclusion. This is things I found on Twitter. And this guy is spreading, he's accusing this guy of spreading a lie and showing Palestinians shooting fireworks on the Temple Mount, causing the tree to go up in flames, asking the guy to retract what he said. It's a lie. It's a blood libel, and I don't see that it's happening. But that led to further escalation. Part of that escalation was probably the largest number of rockets ever shot into Israel from Gaza in a 24-hour period. Clearly the most. There were barrages of rockets, sometimes 130, 137 being released at the time. Maybe that's the number of tubes that they had available, and they were able to shoot them all off at the same time. Then they were able to reload them, then shoot them off again. And part of this was designed to test the Iron Dome. So here's a 1-minute video from the IDF about what happened in the 24-hour period, starting with this thing on Jerusalem Day and ending last night. This is just a 1-minute recap about what's happening in Israel. The sirens in Jerusalem. This has not happened for many years. The rockets being fired from Gaza in a barrage that has not ever been seen either. In Ashkelon, there were rockets hitting around Sderot. They hit homes. There were people killed, a school, vehicles. In response, Israel struck, at this time they said 300 targets. I know it's well over 500 or 800 strikes in Gaza. They've destroyed a number of 6 to 13-story apartment buildings, but you see the people all over Israel taking shelter as these rockets are coming in because nobody knows exactly where we're going to land. So Israel is taking a very strong stance to this. They're not going to take it. Here's another photos. These are rockets being launched from Gaza, and you will see how the Iron Dome goes up. The rockets from the Iron Dome go up and destroy the rockets. It's a pretty amazing thing that they've been able. I mean, this is very advanced technology. It was largely successful in shooting down the rockets, but the rockets were a little bit different this time from some communications I've had with some people in Israel. The rockets were shot at a lower angle. That makes it a little bit more difficult for Iron Dome. What Iron Dome does is Iron Dome picks up the rocket, it calculates its trajectory, its speed, and it calculates where it's going to land. And if it's going to land in an open field, they don't bother shooting it down. They let it go. But if it's going to land in a populous area, they will try to shoot it down with an Iron Dome. But it's expensive. It costs thousands and tens of thousands of dollars for each one of these rockets. So it's not a cheap thing. So it's a very sophisticated system. It does a great job. Here's another. This is one of the major barrages coming out of Gaza. And the difference here is usually it's southern Israel, but now they have longer range rockets. Iron Dome doesn't do as well with like cruise missiles. So the rockets now are launching at a lower angle, almost like a cruise missile. This is my understanding. I could be completely wrong on this, so verify what I'm saying. But you can see that the Iron Dome was successful, but you have just this massive barrage of rockets coming in to Israel and Tel Aviv, and there are even, I don't know if I have a video, I don't think I have a video that was taken at Ben Gurion Airport where you see the rockets coming. So this has caused Ben Gurion Airport to be shut down. This is a very, very big deal. The international airport in Tel Aviv is very important. There were buses hit in Tel Aviv. This is a refinery terminal that was struck by a rocket and was on fire. For example, here's a vehicle. I think this might be down in Ashkelon that got hit by a rocket. And you can understand this is very, at least from the perspective of the people that are there, it's very random, and it's a scary thing. Here is an apartment building. I think this is also in Ashkelon that was hit. Another thing that was hit was the Trans-Israel pipeline. I talked about this a few weeks ago. This was largely unknown, but it's a pipeline that goes from Eilat to Ashkelon, and then also there's a branch that goes up to Haifa. And this is the United Arab Emirates and other Gulf Coast countries have looked at this about getting their oil to Eilat, offloading it, and thereby avoiding the Suez Canal, and then they can pipe it up. But the near Ashkelon, one of the rockets did make a direct hit on the pipeline, and it had been burning for some time. I assume they have it under control now. It doesn't necessarily indicate that they're much more accurate with their rockets now than they used to be, but it's because it's only, I think this area that was hit is only about 6 kilometers, which would be about 3.5 miles from the Gaza border. So it doesn't you don't have to have a very good aim. You just have to be kind of lucky to hit the pipeline. It's pretty close. So this is a significant thing. We know what happens when pipelines get shut down. On the left, this is Al-Quds newspaper from the Palestinian Al-Gad. On the right, from the Kingdom of Jordan, talking about what's going on. The condemnation from the Arab countries has been universally against Israel. They have these pictures on the front. I'll have a little interview that I'll play near the end of this from Dr. Michael Oren to indicate to you what to sort of give you why this is a big deal. This is what Hamas wants, though, is they want pictures on the front page. This is victory to them. Whether it's strategic, whether it causes harm or not, they want the propaganda victory. So they have the picture of the Temple Mount burning. They have the apartment buildings that are being knocked down. And again, This is a case where Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are launching rockets from buildings that are occupied by civilians or hospitals or that sort of thing. Israel has, in accordance with its past practices, it has called up people and said, you need to evacuate the building right now because it's going to be attacked. And Israel's not messing around this time. They're not, it doesn't look like they're doing a surgical strike, but they are targeting individual buildings and they're hitting them with munitions, and they're bringing down a 6-story building and in one case a 13-story building. It's a pretty amazing, the accuracy of their targeting is pretty amazing. But the Arabs have been condemning this dangerous escalation, and this is what happens. Our government, the U.S. government, has certainly shifted its policy with regard to the Middle East recently. They've come out and they've condemned the attacks from Gaza, but there is this common theme through the European, Western, and other press throughout the world that Israel's escalating this. We can't believe they're doing this. It's disproportionate. It's not right. Here's the New York Times and Washington Post from this morning. Here's Haaretz, Jerusalem Post today, talking about it, and I think the Jerusalem Post headline is accurate. Tel Aviv has been under an unprecedented Gazan attack. Part of this is a test, as I mentioned, to test how Iron Dome will respond to the newer rocket trajectory that's involved. It's also by launching 137 rockets at a time. They are testing how Iron Dome responds to these. And look, Iron Dome will not get all of these in a rocket barrage. And so this information, intelligence is being transmitted to Hezbollah and Iran up in Lebanon and Syria because they have probably over 150,000 rockets that they can unleash. And they have a huge number of rocket launchers, a very disproportionate number of rocket launchers to their rockets because they want to release them in barrage because the Iron Dome system would be overwhelmed. The other thing that's happened is this headline notes in the Jerusalem Post that the violence there has raised tension and the ties between Israel and the Gulf countries, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, who have entered into normalization agreements with Israel, the Abraham Accords, and the Saudis, who appear to be wanting to do that, but I think that the Crown Prince wants to do it, but King Salman will not allow that to happen because he was one of the proponents of the Arab Peace Initiative, and the Abraham Accords go contrary to that. He's still a big two-state person, a Palestinian. Well, as I've said, it's not a two-state solution. It's a multi-state solution because in San Remo Conference and after, back in the early 1920s, 101 years ago, they decided that there would be two states. There would be Transjordan for the Palestinian Arabs, and there would be a Jewish state west of the Jordan River. But that didn't happen. So now we have Gaza, we have the West Bank, we have Jordan. So they're really talking about a 4-state solution, not a 2-state solution. So anybody that talks about a 2-state solution, that's all there is just really ignorant of the facts or trying to hide what's really going on. This is Israel Hayom. This morning, the newspapers that are Israeli newspaper, you can just see some of the headlines, the pictures that are there, the damage that occurred in different areas. This was a bus. This is either a bus in Holon, the city of Holon in Israel, or Tel Aviv. A couple buses were hit by rockets and destroyed. People have been killed. There have been many people killed and injured, not only in the riots on the Temple Mount, but also in the attacks, the hundreds of attacks and targets that have been hit in Gaza. But again, this is how they win. Here's a picture of, this is the bus in Holon that got hit. This is a big deal. There are people, there was an anti-tank missile that hit a vehicle and killed one person and injured a number of others. Israel is under a siege, and this is a very serious thing. Now, what has also happened, though, is that within some of the, what I would call the mixed cities of Israel, where Israeli Jews and Arabs live, there are riots going on. There is an incredible tension from what I've been reading. The tension, particularly in the city of Lod, which is outside of Tel Aviv, sort of to the southeast of Tel Aviv, they're having riots. The situation is very, very tense. As Jonathan Spire noted, he could feel the tension last weekend, and now it's erupted into clashes in many towns and villages and cities between Arabs and Palestinians. So, in any event, this is what's happening. This is from this morning Times. The rocket attacks continued this morning. Another barrage of 130 some rockets were launched. Here's some pictures. Here's the either Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hamas released this. This is some of the missiles and rockets that they're loading into their launchers. And so you can see that they're getting set up. They're setting this up for a barrage. So I'm going to, two more things and then we're done. I'm going to play about a 4-minute interview with a retired Israeli colonel, I can't remember his name, and then former ambassador to the U.S., Mike Oren, who is a former Likud member. I don't think he's part of the Likud party anymore, but he is a historian. He's very articulate. You might remember him. He was the speaker at the University of California at Irvine a few years ago when the Muslim Student Association kept interrupting his talk. That was... I can't remember his name. He later became president of Ohio State University. I believe that Dr. Oren did finish his talk originally, but he was ambassador to the U.S. Very articulate. So this is about a 4-minute interview that was on this morning on I-24 News in Jerusalem, and then I'll close with sort of the editorial that was in the Leigh Thompson newspaper that kind of gives you the perception of other people in the world that might not be pro-Israel. So first, here's Dr. Oren and this retired colonel.
Do you get the sense Israel's government was caught off guard by Hamas's ability to strike so deep and so effective into Israel so far?
No, not caught off guard in that way. I mean, the Hamas capabilities are no mystery to us. We know they can hit Jerusalem. They can hit our airport. They know that they can hit our cities with massive barrages, and we know that they will try to overwhelm the Iron Dome system.
Okay, so that's not surprising that they launched these huge
What was surprising was the timing. And clearly the government was unprepared for having the rockets strike in the Jerusalem area on the first day of fighting rather than the subsequent stages of the fighting. And that caught the government off guard. And the fact that, the Iron Dome wasn't effectively deployed to prevent that initial barrage, which in terms of its psychological benefit for Hamas was immense. And it garnered support not only among the Palestinians, but pretty much among the entire Muslim world, including among some of our newest friends in that world.
Yeah. Dr. Nerier, I want to ask your take on the damage done so far. I mean, to Israel, we have a key pipeline that was hit, an oil refinery that was hit. We have homes, apartment units across central Tel Aviv damaged. The death toll is at least now 7 in response to the rocket attacks and some of the damage. Are these new missiles and new rockets? Is Hamas, is the payload different? Is it a variant? Are they using advanced weaponry? I mean, to strike a refinery, is that pure luck just from the barrage? Is there something indicating that Hamas's arsenal and is different this time and it's more dangerous than ever before?
Look, the distance between the Ashkelon refinery and the border with Gaza is about 10 kilometers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you don't need any sophisticated missile in order to hit there.
When you launch 500, 600 in a matter of hours.
One could hit in any case. I mean, now you just mentioned that there were about 1,200 missiles that were fired since the beginning of the confrontation. Compared to the quantity of missiles, the damage done is really minor. And till now, the damage is purely psychological more than physical. And the thing is that we have to bear with that situation because it's not going to end tomorrow. We're in the new round between us and Hamas, and this is going to last. Because, I mean, unless Hamas is defeated, I don't think that Israel will stop. So we are in for a long time right now.
These are live images now, just into the IQ4 newsroom. The IDF is striking more Hamas targets in Gaza over the last night. The IDF has already hit more than 500 targets so far. It killed dozens of Hamas commanders. There's another round of IDF strikes in Gaza right now. We're going to keep our eye on these live images. And again, rockets again falling on Israel. Keeping our conversation here in studio, do you believe that Hamas's ability to hit Israel, again, deep into Israel, has been deterred? Or perhaps, unfortunately, in the hours to come, there's going to be more intense barrages as these exchanges continue?
It's very important when addressing that question to caution your viewers to stop viewing this through, say, Western eyes or Israeli eyes. You have to view this through Hamas eyes. How does Hamas view victory? How does it define victory? First of all, it defines victory by not losing. How does it define defeat? It defines defeat is when its major leaders are killed. That's the only real price that Hamas cares about. And the price for us of eliminating those leaders is prohibitive because the leaders are hiding under hospitals and they're hiding under schools. So to get them, you've got to kill a lot of civilians, and then you create a tremendous international backlash, which actually also serves Hamas. I'm looking at these pictures on your screen of Israeli planes or guns striking Hamas neighborhoods, targets, building up buildings. They don't care. In fact, they kind of like it. They like those images going out. Part of their fire at us is designed to provoke our fire at them. Because they want to ultimately deny us the right to defend ourselves, ultimately deny us the right to exist as a Jewish state by denying us our legitimacy. How do they do that? By making us look like war criminals, by getting us to do precisely what you see on your television screens. They're very sophisticated. The only way this ends really with the Hamas defeat, that is if Hamas leaders are personally paying the price for it. And if Israel demonstrates, that it is unwilling to go through yet another round and another round and another round.
Well, that's the sense. So that's the situation. So this is the editorial in the Swiss newspaper. Just let me read a little bit of it because I think that it kind of shows the world perspective on this, not a pro-Israel or a Zionist view, but this is how a lot of people in the world see it. The title is "Jerusalem is to be taken." It is a paradox for a city crisscrossed by Israeli law enforcement and crisscrossed with security cameras, but the three-time holy city is now looking for its new master. The far-right Jewish supremacists galvanized, and notice how they always use this right-wing supremacy thing, galvanized by the results of the last Israeli elections and who have since multiplied violence and provocations. Is that one new master, or is it the Palestinian youth in East Jerusalem subjected to all humiliations and who, without any hope placed in anyone, awakens to a new rebellion? Is it Hamas, which dreams of taking on a broader role in the West Bank than that of a poor manager of the misery in Gaza, and which is already threatening to launch a new intifada? And that's another thing that people need to consider, is that there's a lot of talk that I'm reading that we may be at the beginning of or actually into another intifada, an uprising by the Palestinian Arabs. The difference here this time seems to be that the Arabs who live within Israel proper, who are citizens of the state of Israel, who vote for members of the Knesset, who participate in government in Israel, are really they're very upset. They are not going along with the state of Israel's concern. So we have Palestinian youth, the Jewish settlers, right-wing extremists as they call them, and the Palestinians, which were never called extremist youth. It's only the Jews who are referred to as extremists. This editorial continues the terrible conflagration that began here 20 years ago, which resulted in disaster for both Palestinians and Israelis, which was called the Al-Aqsa Intifada after the Jerusalem Mosque. It is on the same esplanade of mosques that the Israeli police have in recent days engaged in unworthy acts of brutality which have caused dozens of injuries and whose repercussions are still ongoing in Gaza or in Israeli cities hit by Hamas rockets. Of course, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where the Temple of Jerusalem once stood, is a sacred place, especially during the month of Ramadan. Yes, it's so sacred. I guess they brought the miracle of the rocks that just magically appeared and the barricades that appeared within the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I mean, these editorials, these people that look at this and this is what they see and conclude, they're silly and they're foolish. Of course, though, it is the status quo that continues of Jerusalem that is at stake, the cohabitation between the various religions, so much defended by Israel, at least in rhetoric. But even more prosaically for the Palestinians of Jerusalem, this esplanade that also dominates the Dome of the Rock is practically the last place where they are not yet at risk of being besieged by the police or Israeli ultras. A very last refuge that acts as a sovereign space, a scaled-down model of the state to which Palestinians have longed for decades. It is no wonder that this new explosion is also happening at a time when dozens of families are at risk of being evicted from their homes in the Arab district of Sheikh Jarrah. This is just absolute nonsense. This has been litigated for years. The facts of the case are crystal clear that they are not paying their rent. They are not living up to their contracts. But this is the world we live in now, where even in America, evictions have been put on hold for a year now. So for Palestinians in Jerusalem, they say the right to housing, like all others, lasts as long as the occupier wishes. While Israel has been entirely self-absorbed for months by political intrigue and COVID, it is no doubt superfluous to determine whether this explosive policy is aimed at satisfying the far right or whether this same racist right is just exploiting the general blur. As for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, it is equally futile to expect any initiative from him and his Palestinian Authority. Seen from East Jerusalem, he is little more than an old tattered scarecrow, half useless, half harmful. Listen, this is silly in the extreme. This is a battle. This is a war. This has huge prophetic implications in terms of Bible prophecy. This is, we've talked for a long time. I've talked for a long time about what triggers these final conflagrations and wars. Is this it? This certainly isn't an order of magnitude above, I think, what we've seen in the past. Israel is prepared, but there will be, if they do what Michael Oren said and take out the leadership, which will require the destruction of apartment buildings and hospitals, it will be there will be a backlash against Israel unlike anything you've ever seen. It's always been bad. This time will worse. So listen, I'm going to talk more about this on Sunday. I thought I'd just give you a brief update today in the middle of the week. We'll talk more detail about that and other things in the prophecy update on Sunday. Goodness, there's so many things happening on other cultural levels and economic, and it's just it's mind-blowing. But pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We'll continue to try to analyze this in terms of Bible prophecy. This is the siege of Israel. Israel is under siege, and this is a big deal. God bless.